Good evening, everybody. Welcome back for another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Jimmy ARDOIN, and as always, Julio Vela is here.
Ready?
You ready?
Ready. Especially tonight.
I know.
I'm telling you, we're not supposed to show some favoritism, but I'm telling you.
No, we're not, but
dog.
I can't help it. One of my favorite judges in the courthouse is here, ladies and gentlemen. Let's just get right to it and introduce him. Judge of the 228th District Court, Marc Carter. How are you?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you, guys. I appreciate, the opportunity to come out here and talk to you. I've been trying to get over here for a while.
Yeah.
A minute. But right now, I'm working really hard. I'm on the ballot, working really hard and doing everything I can to, to get my information out there. I want people to be making informed, decision, and so I'm here to answer any questions that you have and talk about, what I've been doing the last 15 years on the bench.
I know, and we're going to be with you for the next hour. Just Julio and I and Marc Carter. We're going to answer your questions, take your comments. We got Twitter up. You can hit us up at HCCLA_TV. You can call in with any questions. 713-807-1794 is the number. But how you feeling?
Real good,
Yeah.
I have the glasses. It's for the end.
You're coming down. You're not full of the energy you had last week.
I'll tell you.
Going after Dan Simons.
Look.
Last week he put on a full cross-examination.
Wow.
I asked him some questions. I had people hollering from across the street, saying, "Hey, and I'm, what's going on? Great show, awesome show." A number of the judges pulled me aside and said, "Great show." I mean, it was good. But I'm pumped that you are here, and So speaking of the juice.
Yeah.
I've been going to all these fundraisers. My wallet is like this. It's usually decent, okay? Not too decent, but it's usually pretty decent. But it's like this, and I'm exhausted.
Well, it's just a shame that we have to actually run,
Right.
And there are very few judges that I think actually like the way, judges are selected in Texas, people on the bench, because, it's by party. And oftentimes what happens is that people, don't know who the judges are, who they're voting for. And so when you talk about a straight ticket, generally that's generated through, emotion, not through, any kind of, investigation or anything like that. But like people will be, mad at the president, so they'll vote, one way, or they'll be mad at the governor, they'll vote another way, that kind of thing. You just, and then you have, this collateral damage at the bottom of the ticket. And that's typically going to be, the judges, the people that, that you guys rely on and our community relies on. We're the people that the folks in Harris County see every day. And, it might not be you, but it could be somebody that that comes into the criminal justice system or the civil courts, and you want the judge to be, fair and, of course, qualified and have temperament and those kinds of qualities.
We saw it. Supreme Court hearing all about temperament, and background, and everything else. I mean, and I made the point, early on that everybody was taking such an interest. They always take such an interest in the Supreme Court nominee hearings, but it's really guys like you who can really truly affect people's everyday lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were talking about that before we started this show about a federal bench. And, that's absolutely an honor, to be a federal judge, of course. But, what I do as a state judge in Harris County with things like the Veterans Court, where I see, people, veterans every day, and I'm helping them, I'm getting them the treatment that they need, and counseling and taking, homeless people off of the street and putting them in housing and supervising, probationers. Those are things that state court judges do. Federal judges don't get, they don't really have that opportunity to do that. And so it's really, satisfying to have a chance, an opportunity to make a difference in your community the way a state court judge can.
What was your so you're a staple of the courthouse, but also the programs that you've been amongst a collaboration of individuals, but that you've spearheaded.
Yeah.
What was one of them being the Veterans Court?
Yeah.
What was your inspiration behind that?
Well, it probably starts at birth. I was born into a military family. I'm 59 years old. Well, on the 15th, I'll be 59 years old. And so I was 9 years old when my dad went to Vietnam. And I remember that was like 1968. I remember what the country was like at that time, but all I knew were every adult male that I knew was a soldier, at that time in my life. And so it had a huge impact on me. And of course, when I went to school, I was in ROTC and I became, an Army officer. And when
let's take it back. Where did you go to school? Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Germany, Army brat. I went to University of Texas, and that's where, exactly.
There it is. There it is.
Finally shine.
Yes.
And by the way,
Texas football is back.
We're back.
I'll make it clear that I'm totally on board with Coach Herman.
Yes.
I was a skeptic, but I said after he beat OU,
you can come back anytime you want, Judge. Exactly. You can come back anytime you want.
So I'm all good with that. But so I was in ROTC there, and that was again. A great experience for me. It's something that I realized that being an Army officer is something that I would be pretty good at, and I was actually very successful in that career. I was in military intelligence. My wife was a German national, and she's of course a U.S. citizen now. I met her when I was a lieutenant stationed over there. So when I made the rank captain, I decided that that I would do something other than the military. It was a family decision. And the funny thing was that experience getting out is kind of hard to explain, but I really did have like a sense of loss, a sense of grief. I go from this job where have 250 soldiers underneath me, and we're doing intelligence operations in Cold War Europe. And everybody's got, a job from private to, all the way up the chain, and, your family. And you're not just doing your mission, but you're taking care of your soldiers, their families, you're making sure they're fed, you're making sure they're housed, their kids, everything, that's how the military works. So you have this sense of unity, and what I call it's you become a tribe. And, so what happened when I left the military, I didn't realize it, but I was like leaving my tribe, okay? And so I had this space where, I didn't know what I wanted to do or really who I was. And so it was a conversation with my father. He's like, well, what is it that you'd like to do? And I said, well, I always thought about being a lawyer. And he said, well, there you go. So that's how I ended up going to Texas Southern. Went to law school at Texas Southern when I left the military, and I clerked for Judge Hoyt after law school. He's always been somebody that I've looked up to. One of the things that I learned from him and that I always carry with me is, the way that he treats people in front of him.
You want to talk about somebody with judicial temperament.
Oh my goodness. I remember one day after a very contentious, sentencing, and people were mad and angry at the defendant. And I remember Judge Hoyt walking out and he looking at me and said, there go I, but for the grace of God. And, and that's it. That really is the key. And so that's the kind of concept that people need to take to the bench is, you're not any better, you're not special. It's just that your circumstances are very different. But, but for the grace of God, you could be in a completely different situation.
I think there was a movie about that, Trading Places.
Yeah, right?
Kind of proved the point.
Yeah, $1 Mortimer.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned your father as what kind of impact and how did that play about where you've come and now on the bench? How does that play into your life and decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. My father was a career Army officer, and he was, when he left the military after he got out after 18 years because he had a disability in the service, so he had an early retirement, a medical retirement. But he spent, I want to say from a good part of my life, he went from having a cane to in a wheelchair, and back in the 70s, you didn't have curbs that were made for wheelchairs and all these. You didn't have, you didn't have parking lots for handicap or anything like that. Those things didn't exist. And so my father, he was born in the 30s, in a segregated America. And, one of the things that he said was like, I spent my entire life, fighting for equality. And now, I'm in this minority group that anybody can be in at any moment, and I just, it's like, you just get this really sense of, I learned, compassion from him. I grew up in a house where my father told us that he loved us, and that's not something that was really common back in those days, especially from a soldier, right?
Right, sure.
But and this really started when he came back from Vietnam. When he came back from Vietnam, he was a much kinder, gentler person than I remembered him leaving.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
because Vietnam, I mean, that was the real first generation of returning soldiers that really had trouble reintegrating into society.
Well, they didn't come back the heroes that came back from
World War I, World War II, and Korea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so they, the way the country, had looked at this generation really wasn't fair. So, when I first went to UT, I did not want to be in the military. I'd seen that, and I was like, no. This was 1977. I was like, no, I don't think so. And then after my first semester, I went back home. My dad saw my grades, and he said, you know what? Maybe you should just enlist because you're not ready. You're not ready. And so I made a deal. I was like, well, how about, if I just go into ROTC? And sure enough, I went into ROTC, and I was like, man, this is where I belong. And I really grew up, learned some discipline and got a lot of things out of that.
Now, as a pillar, as a standing judge, do you see some of the veterans that are coming back that you're now a very integral part of their life?
Yeah.
And do you see them coming back with loss and still have that hope for compassion? And do you see that? And how do you, because I guess we're all built and make our decisions based on our prior past and experiences. How have you taken that and used it to help people?
Like I said, I can take my own experience, my own sense of loss and being, and struggle, trying to find a life after the military, and then and not being a combat veteran. And then you take that same experience and then you put, the being a combat veteran on top of that, because it's one thing when you're living together, in a non-combat environment, but you're still responsible for one another and all that kind of thing. It's another when you're surviving on a rock in Afghanistan, and and every day is like just just miserable. You're either dying from boredom or from gunfire.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a really, and so all you have are those people that are with you in that situation. So then when you leave that, the sense of loss is like 10 times what my experience was, because you just have that just real grief. And then of course the idea of leaving people behind and losing people. So the trauma that they experience is significant. Now, having said that, my Veterans Court is not only for people that are combat veterans.
Talk to us about the Veteran Court. What does it offer, and talk to us about it.
Sure. The Veterans Court, the concept, it came to me. I actually learned about this concept from Pat McCann.
I was going to bring his name up. Yeah.
So Pat McCann, and I was having a really bad day, and the reason I was having a really bad day was because a Marine who was charged with driving with a child passenger, intoxicated with a child passenger. This Marine was an exceptional Marine. He had say 2 Bronze Stars for valor and 3 Purple Hearts in Iraq. This guy fought in Fallujah. He was like one of those first units to go in, and he was just a young man, and his experience was just horrible. He comes home, he gets his arm gets blasted up. He's at a hospital in San Antonio where they save him his arm, but he's there for a year. In the process, and of course he's experienced all this trauma. He's married, but they have parades for him here in Houston and all of these things. And then after the parade is gone, then you're just kind of sitting in this room again, just like, what is this life really going to be?
What's my purpose?
Yeah. Where am I? My friends are, and you're thinking about the loss. Now, and part of his trauma was he lost 5 guys in his unit in one day in a firefight. And again, these guys are brothers, and so I didn't know anything when he appeared in my court. He was just another guy in my courtroom, and the lawyer that was representing him says, "Judge, I want to do a pretrial diversion on this case." And he tells me what kind of case it was, and this was like in 2008, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Right? Because they weren't doing pretrial diversion, and on a DWI,
much less on a felony.
Right.
Yeah, felony
DWI. No.
Forget it. And but I didn't know anything about the case, but I was like, just hey man,
take your shot.
Yeah, go for it. And so they came back a month or so later, and the district attorney's office had approved the pretrial diversion.
Wow.
And the lawyer gave me the packet, and the prosecutor's like, "Judge, you have to read this guy's story." And so I read his story, and it just kind of sent me over the top. I was like, man, you go from being this hero to a felon overnight. And part of the problem was he had got addicted to painkillers.
Sure.
And so the trauma, the painkillers, his divorce had become final that evening, and it was just sent him over the top. So I was having a bad day, but I was happy for him, but I was really mad about, what was happening, because, I know what happened to those Vietnam era veterans. And I was a young prosecutor seeing, Vietnam era veterans coming through this system, and as a judge as well. But I was starting to see young people now. And it was making me angry. And I just sitting down and just having just kind of a bitch session with Pat.
Yeah.
And he says, "Hey man, I heard about this Veterans Court in New York." And so, I Googled it and we looked at it and we're like, let's do it. Let's do it. And so me and Pat, we got together, and I started, reaching out to my connections in Austin and in the legislature, as well as Caprice Cosper, who had started the drug courts, right?
Right.
And I was like, Caprice, how this is what I want to do. How do I get it done? And of course Mary Covington. And what she said, Mary Covington was like, look, Judge, this is what you do, and this is what you do best. You go to Austin, you shake hands, you tell your story, and you tell people what's going on, and let me do all of the construction stuff, designing, because she had already, done a drug court, so she knew how to do that. So that's what I did, and I went to Austin. It was in 2008. And if you recall, in 2008, it was like very contentious, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And nothing was happening in the legislature. There was only, like one of the only pieces of legislation to go through was this legislation that had the Veterans Court was part of it. And so I'll never forget going down there and sitting in the room with the Senate committee, having a hearing, on Veterans Court. So it was my turn to go up there and talk to him. And I swear, man, there was, I would say, Senator Hinojosa from South Texas, Vietnam era veteran. He was the only guy in there, and maybe one other person I don't recall. But he was the only guy that was sitting in there when I started to talk. And so I said, hey, look, I'm glad you're here, and I figured you'd be here because this is one of these deals where, we're veterans, soldier to soldier. We have to look after each other, and this is what's happening. So I started telling the story, and I had my the soldier that I was talking about, the Marine I was talking about. He came with me, and he was in his uniform, and the guy looked fantastic.
Amazing.
He was dressed,
amazing.
and he was wearing he had his everything there, and so his medals, and so I introduced him to Senator Hinojosa, and I said, look, we want to tell you what's happening, and so I told him the story about Marty, and I said, and he's here, and I had Marty stand up and come over there, and then I didn't know this, but they have a room in the back, and all the senators are in there, they're eating donuts and drinking coffee.
Yeah, right.
But then, they started hearing the story, and next thing I know, the panel was full. They all came out there to hear, about, this story of these veterans and what we were trying to do and accomplish in Houston. And then it just snowballed from there. I got invited up to the governor's office to talk to the governor, as well as his chief of staff, who was a Vietnam era veteran. So I had all kinds of support. And again, it was one of the only things to go through. Now that Marine is doing wonderful. He's remarried. He's got a house full of kids. And in fact, I presided over the wedding ceremony, and that was really great. But the court itself,
So let's talk about the court.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Let's take a phone call real quick.
Oh, we got a phone
call. I'm sorry.
So let's jump in before we talk about the court. Hello, thanks for calling Reasonable Doubt.
Hey guys, it's Murray. How are y'all?
Good. How are you doing, Murray?
Hey, Murray.
We're waiting for a seat. We're waiting for you, man.
We had an open seat tonight. You could have come on.
When I called in, my son said, "Are you going to crank call the show again?" I'm like, "No, I am." Cool. So I love Judge Carter. I get the honor of practicing in his court on a frequent basis. And I wanted to ask him about when he won the William H. Rehnquist Award for Judicial Excellence.
Yeah.
And how he got nominated and what that whole process was like, including the award ceremony. I'm going to hang up and listen because I know about feedback and all, but I did want to hear about that experience.
Thanks for the call. Good to hear your voice, Murray.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, Murray. That's a great question because it ties into this conversation.
Yeah.
The Rehnquist Award is given to one state court judge in the United States every year. So what happens is all 50 states, their chief justice of that state will get nominations, and then he will select a person to send forward to the Chief Judge of the United States, Chief Justice Roberts. Chief Justice Roberts then makes a selection. So it is an award given by the National Center for State Courts, and you know, it's a wonderful award.
Absolutely.
You know, they give it to one judge in the country every year, and one state judge. And I mean, you're talking about thousands of people. And I had no idea about this. I had a colleague that said, "Hey, I need you to give me a resume and to tell me, tell your story." And so I was like, "What's this for?" He said, "Look, I can't tell you, but just do it." So I did it, and of course it goes up, and I get nominated by Chief Justice Heck. And then it went to, and I didn't know, but he sent that to Chief Justice Roberts, United States Supreme Court. And I was selected that year. And the award itself is for judicial excellence. In this particular case, it had to do with my work, with veterans. And I don't know if people know this. I know you guys do, but the general public doesn't know that things like the Veterans Court that I do, it's extra, it's volunteer, it's pro bono work. It's I don't get paid extra. It's time that I make out to do and be there. And so they recognize that. And so it was really, really wonderful. I get this phone call, and they tell me that I had been selected, and I didn't even, I was like, what?
Selected?
Yeah,
Who nominated me?
Yeah. And so then I learned all about it. It was great. The way the Chief Justice of the United States, he had a banquet at the United States Supreme Court. And so I sat, at a table with the Chief Justice, and there were all of the state Chief Justices there, and all of the members of this organization, and it was in the halls of the United States Supreme Court. I got to invite some very dear friends who were there, and of course people from my court that helped make it possible. Pat McCann introduced me. And then I was able to give a speech. And in my speech, I talked about how important it is, jail diversion programs. I talked about, jail overcrowding. I talked about, the war, and how one of my main problems with this war is that, we go to work every day and don't think about it. Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, and my dad was in Vietnam, it was on TV every day. You didn't go a single day without hearing about the war. One side or the other. People were either protesting it or cheering it, whatever. But it's like everybody had skin in the game. And that's the problem now. It's like, nobody has skin in the game. And so that's why it's just dragging on and on and on. Because really, the only people that have skin in the game are the people that are over there fighting.
Yeah.
And that's just a really bad formula in policy. I don't know how it ends, but I know that's a distraction from the award.
But
I can't get over it. I'm passionate about it, and sometimes I have to check myself because I have to check myself about, am I hearing everything, or am I being biased? Let me check. Let me hear the other side. What are the people saying? But I haven't found many people that disagree with me.
No, I don't think you're going to find many people that disagree with you.
If somebody disagrees, I'm all ears, because I want to be balanced in the way I see this.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you talk about jail overcrowding. I mean, I'd like to hear from your perspective. I mean, you've been on the bench 15 years. You deal with some of the gnarliest cases in the courthouse. I mean, that's the thing about the felony courts is compared to misdemeanor court, you see such a dramatic variance between the types of crimes. I mean, it goes all the way from, like you're talking about, DWI with a child passenger, all the way up to capital murder. Right. And so, I mean, comparing those cases, they're night and day. I mean, a lot of people obviously don't really have a problem, I mean, with violent crime and how punishments are assessed. But it seems like what we seem to be focusing on, and rightly so, is the crimes where such as the Marine, where, you know, you come back to, where's the real criminal intent here?
Yeah.
And you know, is this person really out intending to harm society, or are they doing more harm to themselves? And there just seems to be this huge population in our criminal courthouse of that kind of defendant.
I think it's even bigger than that. I think it just comes down to just humanity.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, we're in the people business. You know, everybody, it's people. We're talking about humanity. And at some point, you just have to look at the human being, and you have to always recognize that that's a human being in front of me. And so many of them have, you know, behavioral issues that are a result of, you know, mental illness, drug use, and on. You know, and the thing is that what we know about human behavior is that it can be modified. We know that. That's you know, there's data out there for that. And we know that when you send people to prison, their behavior is modified as well.
Sure.
But not in the direction that we like. Now, having said that, yeah, there are people that need to go to prison. You know, like my mother used to say, Mark, there's some people that just got to go.
Well, I mean, like I said, there's a difference between some people who are just inherently bad people and people who are just, they can't get out of their own way.
Right.
You know? And that could happen to anybody. I mean, you could be the most educated, you know, on the right track, and something just sidetracks you somewhere, and you know, and gets you totally derailed. Do we really want to saddle those people with felony convictions where they can't get their life back on track?
No, it doesn't make any sense, and for so many reasons. And I tell you, one of the main reasons it makes no sense, because it doesn't make your community safer. When you have a guy, let's say just, you know, a drug possession case or something like this, and he has a felony conviction, then, you know, he can't get a job, he can't get a student loan, he can't get an apartment, he can't do all of these things. And so you've set him up to fail. You've put him in a position where, you know, where criminal behavior is, in his mind, maybe the only way out, maybe the only way to survive, you know. And then he's more likely to associate with people in that same situation. And so what you want to do is, when I put somebody on probation, I'm looking at, how do I put this person on probation? How do I get them the services that they need to be successful and to get a job, you know, and not end up in jail and not end up with the felony conviction? Now, you take my veterans, and that was one of the things that with my Veterans Court that makes it so spectacular, is the fact that we have this federal government with, and these guys have VA benefits. They've got a hospital and people that are specifically trained, you know, to treat their illness, PTSD and addictions. Female veterans that suffer from military sexual trauma. And not only females, but some males as well. They also have specific training to deal with those issues that you can't get in the civilian population.
And you're certainly not going to get it in the jail population.
And you're not going to get it in jail. And if you don't treat it, that's where they end up.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we have a phenomenal doctor. Her name is Dr. Stoller, and she's amazing. She's from Baylor College of Medicine. But she is amazing. She does the assessments. So everybody comes into the program, they get assessed by either Dr. Stoller or Dr. Notabon and a couple other doctors over there. And they, you know, so we know what their issues are. And I know their story. So if you have somebody on a probation where the judge knows their story, knows their issues, and has, you know, a grain of humanity in them, then they can get them the help that they need and actually make your community safer. And everybody wins. Now, having said that, there are going to be people that fail, that aren't ready, that maybe, you know, there's more to it than I'm able to see, and they just fail, maybe commit new crimes. It's going to happen.
Let's talk. Oh, yeah.
Another call coming in.
Oh, here's the phone.
The phones are lighting up tonight. Hello, thanks for calling Reasonable Doubt.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call. It's refreshing to see somebody like Judge Carter with a holistic approach on the bench. And I wanted to ask him how he sees the bail lawsuit or bail reform in Harris County, especially since he mentioned that we are dealing with human lives and some of the problems that we've been seeing in the jails in Harris County. And I don't think he's a party to the lawsuit, but I would be interested to know his thoughts on it, and I'll take the answer off air. Thank you.
Thanks for the call.
Okay. No, that's a good question. It's something that's looming and and weighing heavy on Harris County, especially those misdemeanor judges that are involved. And as you guys know, being in the business, there is a balance. And this is the other thing that we know. It's true not only with the criminal justice system, but it's pretty much true in life. If you're poor, you're gonna be at a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if you're talking about education or what. And I don't think that there's ever going to be a system that's going to make that can correct that. That said, it doesn't mean that we can't do better, and make it at least reasonable for people to make a bond. Now, having said that, I don't believe that if you're poor, that means that you should get a cost-free bond. All right. If you commit an aggravated robbery,
Yeah.
and you're in my courtroom, and a lawyer comes to me and says, "Judge, you got a $75,000 bond on my client, or a $50,000 bond on my client," and he can't make it, I'm like, well, there's a lot of things that go into that. I mean, I don't think that the idea is that if you can't afford a bond, that there has to be a bond lowered so much so that you can make it, because you have all these other considerations.
Well, and I think that's why the misdemeanor courts are the first arena of attack, because certainly when you look at what a bond should be, the purpose behind it is to reasonably assure a defendant's appearance in court.
Well, and protect the community.
And to protect the community, but I mean, the first and foremost thing is, what can I do to reasonably assure this person's appearance in court?
Yeah.
I have to look at, okay, what's their financial history? What's the nature and circumstances of the offense? I mean, are we talking about, and that's where the community portion of it come in. Is there a potential danger to the community? And now, versus you take a aggravated robbery versus a drug possession case.
Yeah,
I mean, they're night and day. I mean, you've got two totally different punishments that are available to them.
And that's the same thing in felony court. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times I've had a guy that had a misdemeanor case and a felony case, and my bond was like $2,000, and the misdemeanor bond was like $25,000.
Right.
I don't, but I've never been a misdemeanor judge. I don't know how that works and why that is.
But I mean, I think that's why the misdemeanors are the first area to get attacked, right?
Yeah.
Because the punishment range there's not as wide a punishment range. I mean, it's 6 months for a Class B, 1 year for a Class A.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about a great disparagement in punishment, where you're actually looking at what's the potential punishment range that they're looking at, the nature and circumstances of the offense, the need to protect the community, you're having to balance all these factors. I think that really comes into play a lot more in the felony courts.
Yes,
so,
it absolutely does. Now, I think that the result of Judge Rosenthal's result was correct, in that it definitely discriminates against the poor. It definitely does. When you have a cash bonds like that, you have two people charged with nonviolent misdemeanors, and one person has to stay in jail for until the case is resolved because they can't make the bond.
Yeah.
And you have other people that have the means to get out. And it's just, like I said, it's a simple misdemeanor. Doesn't seem fair. And for the most part, it's not.
Well, and I always used to think that on felony, and I still think this, on felonies where you have drug cases and white collar cases, theft cases and stuff, where you double the amount of the theft or double the street value of the drugs to come up with the bond. And so you end up in some of these cases with $1 million bond or a $2 million bond. Nobody's going to be able to make that.
No, and I don't know.
It's just a straight up punishment.
Yeah, and that's because we have the direct filing system. So it does impact that. So what that means is, it used to be when a person was arrested, they would go to like a JP that would determine what the bond was. If the case wasn't assigned to a court or anything like that, the JP would determine what the bond would be, right? So then they got rid of that for direct filing. So then when somebody's arrested, what happens, it automatically goes into a hopper and gets assigned to a court right away. So as soon as somebody's arrested, before they even go to a probable cause court on a felony, they've already been assigned to me. So that's my case, but it's going before a magistrate judge. And so what they determined the best way to handle that was to have a bond schedule, so that somebody wouldn't have to wait, to go to a magistrate judge, so that they could get out right away. Like, because
Sure.
It's a possession case. Let's say it's a bond schedule says it's a $5,000 bond. Your mom or dad goes and makes the bond for you. You get out. That doesn't happen for everybody. It might be 24 hours. Then there is a possibility for a
bond reduction.
A bond reduction or a PR bond or something like that. But so the process is slower if you don't have money. If you're poor. But on a nonviolent case, eventually it does get to the district court judge, who can make a determination as to whether or not that a PR bond or reduction is appropriate. But initially it goes, like under the bond schedule. Now, generally I always would hear the cases when, I don't know if you recall, but I used to have all of the new cases come in, and I would hear the probable cause on every single case. And so then I could hear, all right, that's no probable cause, or that bond needs to be reduced, or that bond needs to be, raised, or that person is, a PR bond and the like. But now we have a system where we have the RIC court, their reintegration court, so people are automatically get a PR bond.
For these types of for certain types of
for non-violent. I'm sorry, for
less than a gram.
Less than a gram, and the only DWIs I see are going to be
child passenger or third offense.
So they're not going to get a PR bond, but it's primarily possession cases, and maybe I think theft cases. So it's, where we had the MacArthur grant, and the MacArthur grant, so we've been working with them for 2 or 3 years in how to design our our felony system of giving, bonds, and what's the appropriate bonds, and how do we get, how do we do assessments to get people, PR bonds? Before, we didn't have an assessment system. So when we didn't have that, then I would say, well, have them come in, I would hear, and then I would determine if it was a PR bond, because I could do an assessment. Those things that we talked about, ability to pay, likely to reappear, and all of those kinds of things, and then do the PRs. It wasn't a problem. Did it for, I'm pretty certain I probably gave more PR bonds than anybody in the courthouse.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Under that process.
Yeah.
But there's always a better way to do things, and I don't have all the answers, and I'm certainly open to making what we do better. And that's why we invited the MacArthur people to come in, or actually they selected us because of how big it is and our willingness to participate with them. So Yeah, we work hard with the data and try to get the right result. Sorry.
Well, we got another call coming in. Let's hit the phone lines once again. Hello, thanks for calling.
Yeah, thanks. I'm a defense attorney, and I practice in front of Judge Carter several times. I wanted to ask his opinion on something. I have kind of a broad question and then a more specific question. The broad question is, Judge Carter, in your vast experience, is there something that you would like to see the legislature change in the code or in the penal code or the code of criminal procedure? And my more specific question about that, my axe to grind is, what do you think about, do you have an opinion that you can share with us about the 25 to life, the true habitual statutes, and particularly in cases where they're
I thought you were going to ask me if I believe marijuana should be legalized.
Okay, well, I have a third question now. But specifically on the 25 to life statute, you have someone who gets a 2-year sentence on a PCS for possession of controlled substance case, and a few years later they get another one, and then they pick up a third one, and just if you have any thoughts or like that, you can share with us. I'd be curious.
No, you know what?
Thank you.
Again, that 25 to life statute, that's again one of those things that I'm talking about when people and politicians make decisions based on emotion. We've got to be tough on crime, so let's make this this really draconian type of law that says the minimum is 25 years. And it's so it really doesn't make a lot of sense. But having said that, prosecutors have discretion. And when you have an office that uses that 25 to life as a scare tactic and those types of things, and then if you have a good case, you feel your client is not guilty, but they're saying, well, if you go to trial, we're going to have these enhancements, and if you lose, he's going to be looking at 25 years, and he's going to be fighting his case from behind bars. I don't. That's not me, but I don't have the power to make that decision.
Right.
I can say that. I think that the district attorney's office is more aware and I think how we say more using more discretion on when to apply that 25 to life statute. I personally think that that it works if you've got a really bad offender that should do no less than 25 years, and there are people like that out there.
Yeah.
But I know that, and I think that in the Chronicle they talked about a case the other day, a fellow who was a 25 to life case, and so the district attorney's office was fine in coming to me for punishment, and I told them, I'm not sending this guy to prison for 25 years. I'm going to give him probation. Because that, to me, it was a probation case. It was a drug case, and I gave him probation. And I want to talk to you about people that are in recovery, and these things will make sense. But
no, it's interesting you say that though, because I mean, a lot of judges, both in state court and federal court, they have certain quirks that they say, you know what, I'm just not doing this, or I'm not doing this on everything. I've never heard you say that. I mean, you've always been like, bring me things and I'm going to be open to listen to whatever ways that you might suggest, and I have my own ways I might think about it too.
Yeah, well, I mean, this planet is way too vast and expensive for me to have, to cut it off like that. You never know, what kind of things might come in front of you. So if you have this policy, and then you have a case that it doesn't work, well then,
what do you do? You box yourself in.
What do you do? Yeah, you're locked in, and it doesn't make sense, and you soon recognize that your policy is really bad policy. So this particular case, though, I gave him a deferred, and he was working in a program. He was working really hard. He was doing really well, and then Hurricane Harvey hit, and so this guy was in recovery, and what you have to understand, and this is a thing that judges should understand about addictions, know the difference between sobriety and recovery. To do this business, you have to have some understanding of addictions. And this is what I can tell you, is that a person that is in recovery is going to be your best employee. They're going to be there on time. They're not going to make any excuses. They hold themselves accountable. So this is a difference. A person that's not in recovery, or your average Joe, if he's late, he's going to make some excuse for it, right? If his work isn't done well, he's going to make some excuse. It's always somebody else's fault. That's how an addict brain works, right? Mm-hmm. But once a person is in recovery, that brain changes. That recovery brain says, I'm responsible. If I don't do a good job, it's not Jimmy's fault. It's because I didn't do it correctly. If Jimmy's mad at me, I don't need to be mad at Jimmy. I need to look at myself and ask myself, why is Jimmy mad at me? And fix that, because you recognize that I don't have the things that I have control over, or those things within me. I can do a better job. I can't change you. I can't change you, but I can change me. And that's what makes people in recovery your best employees when they're in recovery. Mm-hmm. Now, when they're in their addictions, they're your worst. Right. Okay? But when they're in recovery, man, they're amazing. So back to my story. This guy was in recovery. The hurricane hits. He's got to be at work. All right? And so his work calls and says, hey, you know what? It's flooding. You don't need to be here. It's flooding. It's dangerous, whatever. And he says, no, I love my work. I want to be at work. It's something that he enjoys and wants to be there, and he's responsible. And he's like, I'm going to do this. And so what does he do? He goes through, the water to get to work. And unfortunately, the poor guy, he drowned. He died that day trying to get to work. But that was the recovery in him. That the responsibility, like, I've got a job to do. And he was willing to go through, the high water of Harvey to get to his work. That's how much it meant to him.
Let's talk about a job to do. Let's talk about your campaign. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. Yeah. Let's talk about, where is Judge Carter taking his court next? What are some things that you want to make sure that people know about? And also why? Well, should those who are inclined to vote straight ticket, or maybe on the other side of the aisle, maybe switch over for you?
Well, yeah, I think, again, I feel that people vote straight ticket generally because, out of some passion, and as opposed to, and a lot of times it's a result of anger, and it kind of comes down to that idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You want to change, yeah, but it might not be the change that you necessarily, you're going to get change, but it might not be the change that you're happy with. And it's, again, like disciplining your child when you're angry. That's not a good idea, because you might go too far. You know what I mean? You need to do things with the reason and deliberate thought, deliberations, right? Yeah. You have to go through this act of voting, deliberately, and not, emotionally. And so it concerns me, because people in Harris County, people in this country, people in our nation have been angry, and rightfully so, about a lot of things. And I think that a lot of people are going to go to the polls, and they're going to be mad one side or the other. And at the end of the day, there'll be a lot of people at the bottom of the ballot that could really help your community and are doing the things that you want them to do. But voting a straight ticket one way or the other, hurts you, hurt yourself. So you'll hear politicians arguing, to go vote a straight ticket. I'm not a politician. But they'll say vote a straight ticket, but not because it's good for you, but because it's good for them. Sure. And that's what politicians do, right? Voting a straight ticket is not good for you. Yeah. It is a very bad idea. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It's a very bad idea, because you will vote for people that are not qualified or not the best qualified. Now, if you have this situation where it's a toss-up, where you like both candidates, well, vote your party. That makes sense, okay? But there are situations where there is one candidate that is clearly more qualified than the other, and I think you need to look at that down ballot. So, what do I want to do? I want people to take the time to investigate, these candidates, not just me, but all of the candidates, and to make a choice that's best for them and their community, and not to make a choice out of anger. And hopefully they'll vote for me. They'll look at my credentials and vote for me. I'm working hard. I'm working really hard to let people know what I'm doing. I'm going just about everywhere I can. And at the same time, working my docket, working in Veterans Court, and doing all these things. But it's important to me, and I love what I do, and I like to continue to be the judge of the Veterans Court. I like to continue to, be the judge of the 228th, in doing the things that I'm doing, because these concepts with the Veterans Court, it's not just with veterans. These ideas are true for people on regular probations too. And so I would just like to continue to do that.
Yeah.
But it's not my choice.
No, it's not. But
it's out of my control.
I'm going to further implore people to go look at the Houston Bar Association polls. Go read what the Chronicle wrote this weekend or this past couple days. They made their picks, and I feel like they made some pretty informed picks. And they're not just picking one side versus the other. They're picking one on the other side. As we always say in our business, vote the person, not the party. Right.
Yeah.
And we don't have too much time left. I'm getting the signal to wrap up, but I appreciate you coming on. I really do. I mean, you've been one of my favorite judges in the courthouse since I started practicing law, and it's just such a pleasure to have you on the show. And I hope everybody does get out there, learn about you, and regardless of what party they might be, I hope they do cast their ballot.
Yeah, it's just a shame that we have to run. It'd be better if we ran nonpartisan.
Yeah, it
People
would.
would definitely look at the person and not the party. But like I said, some people are passionate about their party and would rather be Russian than vote Democrat, right?
Exactly.
So I mean, they're on both sides like that.
There is that. But that's all the time we have for this week, ladies and gentlemen. For my co-host Julio Vela and our guest Judge Marc Carter, the 228th. Hook 'em horns.
All right.
And good night, everybody. We'll see you next week.
There it is. I have to. They've been winning ever since I put the